Okay, today we're going to talk about Topaz software, and this is aimed at any photographer. But the thing I really like about the software is that any enthusiast or anyone that just wants to take family pictures can, with literally one click, change the picture for the better. And as I kind of get into this, I'll show you that you can do more, but for most of it, you can just do it with one click. The software itself is actually a suite of like 16 modules, and then the 17th piece is something that allows you to not have to use it in Photoshop or Lightroom or Photo or iPhoto. It is called Photo FX Lab, which is its own. You're able to launch that, and then you can get to all of the suites or all of the actual plug-in pieces you own. You can buy the whole collection, and you can buy them one at a time. I'm going to concentrate on this one here, which is called Adjust, which is a real workhorse in this thing. I'll show one or two of the others, but mainly we're going to concentrate on the Adjust software. So here, I'm going to start. We're going to work through Photoshop in this thing. That's my normal. Well, actually, Lightroom is my main thing, but if I want to work in layers, I go to Photoshop. So, I'm going to open. Let's start with this one. Okay, so this is what came out of the camera. With one click, it could look like that, or with another click on a different part of the software, it could look like that, or that, or that. It's literally a one-click thing. We're going to make a copy of it by simply clicking on the layer and dragging down to that little folded corner icon. And go up to Filter, go to Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust. And now this opens up the plugin module. And what I was talking about here is in each of these different categories, you have a range of all of these different looks that you can get. So to make it easier, I set this up so I've got my own filters that I made for this particular presentation. So you can cycle through all these different effects just with one click. And if you go to like a stylized thing, you can go to something that looks like a blueprint. So in its simplest form, that's the software. You have hundreds of, maybe hundreds of different presets that you can simply click on, and it will change the look of your photo. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and reset this. Now we're going to start with the basic thing. We'll go to let's go to Spicify, which is a interesting thing. Okay, so here, let me explain how this works over on the adjustment side. So this is if you want to go past just doing the one-click thing. You go over here, and the way this works is the adaptive exposure changes the look by applying more and more of that formula. The other thing that changes is another slider that's called regions. And regions works, if you have regions low, it is basically dividing this width into 4 columns. And so you would have it's basically reading a region like this. Can you see the cursor? And this little square here, well here, and so you'd end up with 4 squares and then about 6 squares deep. So it's reading large hunks of this thing. As you move it over to the right, you're adding more and more squares or more columns across, so you're reading finer and finer pieces of it. And as you get way over, it starts to change things all over it starts to change. You can see how there's a halo around here now. So it is beginning to read more and more detail in there. And sometimes you don't want that. So if you start getting halos, you want to keep the regions thing fairly low. And as you move back, you can begin to see what's happening to the sky. So you want to ride that. Then here, there's also the next slider down is called contrast, and it's just what it does. It works on the contrast of the photo. The next one is brightness, and it works just like any other brightness slider. The next one is protect highlights, so you're not affecting the highlights in the picture as you go to the right. You are affecting it as you go to the left, and then the same with shadows. You're not over to the right. You're opening up the shadows that way. So that's the first heading here. The next heading is like details, and there are 2 things here: strength and like detail boost that work the same as adaptive exposure and regions. So you can way overcook the thing for details and way overcook it even more with that. And then you can also change the threshold of, as you go over to the right, it like sharpens finer and finer and finer details. If it's over to the left, it's not sharpening much. Radius changes the amount around the detail that it's emphasizing. And sharpen is just like a regular sharpen thing. It doesn't do a lot in this module. Then you can go to color. And again, the first thing here is adaptive saturation. You can really pile it on or pull it back. And the same with like color regions. It's the same thing as the regions up at the top, where you're looking at finer and finer pieces of the photo. Then you can go to saturation and move that back and forth to your heart's content, and saturation boost. So if you have a lot of saturation and you boost it, it really goes crazy. And then you can change the hue. You can go to the green, you can go to the magenta, and then there's noise and there's a curve tool and everything else. But for the most part, let's go back to reset. Let's take another one that is simply called color boost. And now this isn't sharpening it much. If you look down here in where the details are, neither of the 2 main sliders are pushed over to the right very much. So that's why this looks more normal. Then, to further confuse you, there's one other tool that's kind of fun. I'm going to go back to reset. And at like the very bottom here, you have a left arrow and a right arrow, and next to that, I can't make out what this icon is, but it's to the left of the apply button. And this is basically, it lets the software choose what it wants to show you, and it shows you stuff that's not in the presets. So it's like a do you feel lucky button. So if you click it, you get a weird thing, and if you click it again, you get another look at it, and you click it again, and it's just the software is just making it up as it goes along. But it's kind of a neat way to explore things. And you can look along the columns on the right for the different settings. And if you find a setting you like, you can save it. You can name it and save it. And so on. You can go on and on and on with this thing. But you can end up with some really interesting looks just by doing that. So let's go on to the next image. So
yeah, question here?
Yeah, a couple of things. First off, if you wanted to, let's say, adjust that building only and not the visuals around that building, like the trees or the car in front, for example, would you maybe draw a line of that building and then do your changes around that?
well,
Isolate the building itself from the rest, from the sky and so forth?
there's a thing called local adjustments that allows you to dodge and burn and everything else. But if you have Photoshop, I'd just do the whole thing, make a layer, and go back and adjust from there with a mask. It's much easier.
Okay, so if you've got Photoshop and Lightroom, why do you want to deal with this?
Because a lot of these effects are almost impossible to do with just Photoshop.
And it'll take much longer.
And you'd have to really be good at Photoshop. You'd have to take a deep dive into Photoshop. And I'm if I say so myself, I've used Photoshop since Photoshop 2, and I can do anything on it, but I can't do what's in this software. We're going to move on. Okay, so I'm going to cancel this. Go here. Don't save. Open up the next one. This is just a simple way of without going into the software. That's another one-click thing. You take a kind of unexciting shot of the Dream Cruise, and with one click, just bring in sunlight that wasn't there that day. The next one it starts with a nicely exposed photo of people. But with like one click, you're able to change it to make it a little more contrasty in this instance. If you look at her hair, it gets darker. To really start pulling out lots of detail. This is kind of a compromise here. And then this one, just to look at the thing in black and white. And that's all one click. You just have to go to the software, find the piece you like in there.
I have a question about the photo itself. I have a perception that there's light from two different directions there on some parts of the picture, but not throughout the whole picture.
There's a bounce card about right here, bouncing into her face.
Yeah, it catches her bounce, but it doesn't really catch his shirt.
Right. It was one of those small circular ones.
Oh, so fullness.
Yeah. This was shot for like part of an ad for one of the car companies. So this really shows you that you have infinite possibilities of doing something without having to do a lot. But now if you want to go into it, let's do that. Let's go to Topaz Labs, adjust. And as we go through just some of these basic things here, you can see how the little preview is changing. But if you find something that is interesting, but it's maybe too much, then you can go over to the controls on the right and begin to change things. So let's just pick one of these. Let's pick vibrance. Okay, so that's what it looked like before. That's what it looks like with the vibrance filter. And if you change the regions, you can see that it's moving things this way. This appears to have less detail. Go to the right, and it starts picking out finer and finer color regions, essentially. And then if you want to apply more of the adaptive exposure, you can do that, and it gets pretty grungy looking. So I would like to come back here. Brightness, you might want to darken it down just a little bit. Flatten out the contrast a little bit. And then if you go into details, you might want just a little bit more detail. And let's go to color, and I'm going to back the color off. Back the saturation off. And there's a different look. And it's whatever looks good to you as you do it. Yep.
Is masking available?
Not as such. So you'd have to go back to Photoshop and use a layer mask. Let's actually go back to Photoshop right now. So I'm going to cancel. And speaking of masking, or just of things in general, let's take this top black and white layer. If you go to opacity, you can begin to pull that back, and you're seeing through that to the original layer, just by sliding the opacity from 100 down to 0. You can also go to the blend layers, and you can go to, for instance, soft light, and that gives it a different look. You could go to multiply, which gives it a really ugly look, and you can just add just a little bit back in. Or you can go to a different layer. Let's take this one. This one here. There we go. Let's take that. And then if this, you go to overlay, you can experiment with that. It's too much. Soft light, and then you can back it off. And you get different variations just by using a little bit of Photoshop, which is pretty simple because all you're doing is changing the blending layer and the opacity. So you have those kind of controls to make it exactly what you want, if you want to take it past that one-click look. On some of these, let me go back to. Well, let's let's move on to the next one. I think there's something in here that we can use. This is a shot at night that is metered mainly for the highlights. But if you don't want it to be that dark, you want to see some of the house, you can do this with one click, going into to Topaz Adjust. And then you can go to the opacity and you can change it through the whole range of that. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility as you're going through these things. You can also change the blend layer to a soft light. That's not working, so you try something else, try screen, and so on. Let's go to the next one. This is a picture of a Jeep standing on its rear end in the middle of a forest. So the first preset with one click just warmed it up a little bit, and it also changed the brightness of the far away light in the center. The next one makes it even warmer. The Restyle module lets you go in, for instance, there's a category called landscape, and you can go through all these different looks. If you want something really pale and icy or something sweeter, just all these different looks as you want to go through it. And some of them work better than others, and it's up to you to figure out which ones you like, because there's so many to choose from.
Do you have any idea, as I said that they're like set in different orders and different lines, does that have significance? Is like one highlights, one shadows, one...
It mainly goes by colors. If you go over to the right, it breaks it down into these 5 colors, and you're able to control them individually. Yeah. So it's like reading color information and probably a little bit of value as well. So you can change hue, you can change saturation, and luminance, darker, lighter, so on. So let's cancel out of that. Next. This is down in Big Bend Country in Texas. And what came out of the camera was nice and punchy, and you'd think, well, gee, that's pretty good. But you can change the look again with one click, or something really, really dramatic. One click. Yeah.
I was a little late coming in, so I don't know if you said this, but is this program kind of like built into Photoshop and the ability to be a little bit more flexible, like if you want a little more red, a little more green?
This is a little different than that. This
More advanced?
this uses color, color contrast, sharpening, kind of all in one click. And then you can go back and you can adjust whatever you want within that thing. But it basically gives you a preset. It gives you hundreds of them, but it gives you all these choices, and then you can go from one to the next until you find what you like. Then if you want to change it a little bit, you've got the controls on the right to do that. So that's this one. Let's go to the next. This is shot by Brian Ershar. And again, one click, which really emphasizes the sky and overall detail. And then if you wanted to give it a different look, with another click, it just makes it nice and gold and warm. Now, here's a place where you can use blending layers as an interesting way to do it. So you're using that warm layer to bring warmth into this one, but it also keeps a lot of detail in the sky from the underlying layer. If I take that layer away and start with the basic layer, it just warms it up, changes the color. But if you want the normal color for this layer, that's what that looks like. And it's just using the blending mode and one layer over the other in Photoshop. So it kind of extends your range of what you want to do with the Topaz one-click preset. Next. Here's an advertising executive that I did a portrait of. This is what came out of the camera. This is just adding more detail to it with the Topaz preset that was called Detailed. This is adding more detail as well as saturation and brightness, and that's called Vivacious. That's in the Topaz Adjust suite, and this is done in another thing I'll show you in a minute, which is called Detail, and this is just bringing out the detail and it backs off the color a little bit. So it's 3 different looks of the same guy with 3 different clicks. It's really simple. So let's go to the detail module, and I'll show you what that is. So that's Topaz Detail 3. And now these normally, let's start with the creative detail collection. So this kind of shows you what's going to happen as we come along here or here. We get a little bit different detail, a little bit more contrast, overall detail. These are real subtle things. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. Light detail, medium, strong, detail light 2, detail strong 2, feature enhancement. So that's the first thing. Then there's highlight detail, where you're just going into the highlights and digging out more detail. So each of these presets gives you a different look to the thing. Shadow detail, smooth, stylized. So this is where it gets a little more interesting. But again, this doesn't give you big swings like Adjust, but it does allow you to make some nice minor corrections until you get to the stylized thing, and it does do a little bit more than just going in and enhancing detail. So as you go through these, you can find something you like. Like this, and then go over here, and this, over on the right side, this allows you to pick overall, or only the shadows, or only the highlights. And let's do overall first. And it lets you change the small details. And then this is the boost for the small details. If you go to the large details, you start to really see things happen. And if you boost that, it gets really, it becomes really evident what's going on. And then you've got the medium details that you can affect. So you've got a lot of control over where the detail falls in the range of the detail in the actual photo. So if you have something that's highly patterned, you may not want to push those larger details. So you can keep those down, but you can go in and you can bring up medium detail, and you can see a little bit more. Then you can go into the tone, and you're changing exposure, changing contrast, highlights only, shadows only. So if you really want to dig deep into this, you've got a tremendous amount of control in this detail module. It even lets you control the individual color details, where, for instance, the cyan red changes just the cyan and the red. It's a little bit what you were talking about, isolating colors. Magenta green, you can go in and change just those. And it's not only, and it's changing the tone, and they're the same with yellow blue. And you can also add fake film grain. So that's a real quick look at the detail module. So I'm going to cancel that, and we'll move on to the next one. You can often use in my own workflow. I tend to use adjust and like detail, and sometimes I'll use clarity. That allow me to go in and do detail things first, just minor details, because I tend not to use these things so they're overpowering, but to just enhance the photo that I'm looking for, the look I'm looking for. So this next one is a factory that's been abandoned. Kind of a nice photo out of the camera, but nothing like it looked like that day. It looked more like this that day. So that was a nice change right off the bat. But if you wanted a different look, you could make it much darker and punchier just with one click. So what I hope you're getting is that you can be very creative without having to really be an expert in Photoshop or anything else. It really gives you a chance to go out and play, you know. Let's take a look at a couple others here. Oops. I don't know if any of you have been inside the Fisher Building up on the mezzanine, but that's what it looks like. So this is with one click. You go from something that came out of the camera with a with a lot of darkness in front, because I was trying to hold detail in the highlights. And then here, you're pulling out a lot of detail and you're brightening up the corridor here. And then this is just another way to look at the same thing with a bit more fine detail. So you go from this to this, and the fine detail just brightens everything up a little bit and gives you more detail up in here. And again, it's just with one click for each of those.
When you talk about detail, is that uniform throughout there, or is that actually recorded in the original photo, but this doesn't show up in the
Yes.
camera view?
Yeah. If you've ever shot with a camera that captures raw files, and you open it up in Camera Raw in Photoshop or in Lightroom, you've got a lot of control over the lightness, the darkness, where the whites and the blacks start and stop, where you can go in and you can change individual colors, their intensity, their hue, their saturation, all within that module, working on the raw file. But think of that as like a film negative. That's essentially the same kind of technology that these plugins are using. They work just as well on like JPEGs, but most of the stuff I shoot is raw. So if I'm using this, I'll normally start with doing a little bit of the work in like the Lightroom, which allows me to like balance color. And you can go in and individually change things, or you can just click auto, and it'll give its best guess as to what that should look like. But then you can go to these plugins, and if you've shot a bunch of photos in the same kind of lighting condition, the same things, you can go through all those photos very quickly and bring them up to the look you want, just with one click, literally, each photo. But all that information is in the raw file. A little bit less is in the JPEG, because JPEG throws information away to compress it. And not all cameras capture raw files, and not all photographers like to use them. But this works with iPhone photos. It works with any digital photo that you have, and it can work with a scanned film photo. But there's a lot of information in that original raw file that you can dig out. So the next one, let's see what that is. Oh yeah. If there's any fans of professional bull riders, here's a guy that is one of those guys. This is what my original exposure looked like in the camera. And with one click, it opened it right up and added detail. Or a different look at it with more color is that. And you could...
What you originally showed in this photo is what you said, what the camera saw.
Yeah.
That's probably not what you recall seeing.
Not at all. What I recall seeing is more of that.
So, then going back to my original question, if this is actually, you know, somebody said, okay, well, everything is processed. But you, in showing this is what you recall, what you saw. In this example, you're making up for the efficiency of the camera, because this is really what you saw.
Yeah.
You're correcting.
Yes, that is one way to go. The other way to go is if I wanted to make him purple. That would be my own creative decision to do that. And that's what fine art's all about, is the old adage that photos don't lie. Photos have always lied. Just by capturing one moment instead of a series of moments, photos lie by the angle you shoot it at, by the lens you use. It changes, lighting changes a photo. So there's all those variables. So there's no actual fact when you're looking at a print. There's something that's the closest you can get to it. But often that's not what an artist is looking for. A journalist, yeah. Artist, no.
There's also a lot of different uses for photos. I mean, depending on what you're using the photo for, you may not be looking to recreate
Exactly.
or a mood or whatever. You know, if it's a photo for an ad, you know, it's a normal thing, it's a normal thing.
Yeah.
You want to create a mood, and that image doesn't want to be just what comes out of the camera. Photographs are used for any number of things.
Exactly. One thing I should show you on this is the amount of detail that it adds. I'll show you before and after. Get this at 100%.
What were you using, like an SLR digital camera for this?
This particular shot was a Canon D1 Mark III. It's a $8,000 body way back then, and about a $3,000 lens. So it was top of the line, you know, DSLR professional equipment. So anyhow, the thing I like about what this does is the way it pulls out detail. If you look at the grain in his in the actual shafts here, it's pretty cool. And this is what it starts at. There's just a hint of it, and this just pulls it out like crazy.
Is this a raw photo?
This was originally a RAW. Yeah, I shoot in RAW. So this is what a developed RAW looked like, but I didn't change it much. For a lot of these things, I went right back to my RAW and just hit auto in Lightroom, and then exported that as just what came out of the camera. That's what I wanted to show. So that's the amount of detail that you can get with just one click. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, is this, like, this is sort of like a plugin for Photoshop. Can you also put it on Photoshop Elements?
Yes. Works on Elements, works on iPhoto, and I think on Photo.
Okay.
So you can use it that way. You can also, if you buy the whole suite, or else you buy one of the modules and the Photo FX, I forget the name now, that is like a host for it. So if you buy the whole suite, you have one main program that gives you access to all of them without having to go to Photoshop or to Lightroom or any of the others.
Okay. So how much does this cost in the various versions?
The whole suite is $500. You can buy the adjust module. Let me see here. Here we go. Let's just look at this quickly. So the adjust module is $50.
Right, okay.
The host for that is called PhotoFX Lab, and that's $80. And then these other things range from $29 up to $70, I think.
Do you have to have the whole thing?
No, because without the host program, you can just use the module in Photoshop or Lightroom, iPhoto, Photo. If you still have, like a Photoshop's elements will work. So you don't have to buy the whole suite. You don't have to. You don't have to buy the PhotoFX Lab if you want to just use one or two of the modules.
So the PhotoFX Lab is a standalone host program for.
Yes. So, and one lucky person in here is going to win the whole Megillah today if you bought a ticket. And if you haven't, have we closed ticket sales? So if you want to buy some, go ahead.
Buy early and buy all.
Yeah. So this is by Brian Ashar again, when they went to Monument Valley. And with one click, you can do that. So it brings out the sky more, brings out the colors a bit more. It's really what it looks like right after a rain to me. And if you want to see a nice black and white, you can do that. And that's done in the black and white module of like Topaz. And that module looks like this. We'll go there. So we'll go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Black and White Effects. Okay. So these almost, anytime you open something in any of these modules, it goes to the last thing you did in it. So I always make a habit of clicking reset to what it looks like originally. So then you can come back here and go, you can kind of go through these previews. Like if you want just a classic look here, you can go to like a cool tone, which gives it a very slight bluish look. You can go more. It makes it a little bit more bluish from the original. You can see the difference in tone. You can go to a high contrast. Again, there's the difference.
What key are you using at the top of that?
I'm actually clicking on the photo, just holding the mouse down to see the original and lifting up for that. I think there's another. I think this little thing up here, yeah, does the same thing. You probably can't see that, but it's like two halves of a circle with arrows on it. You can look at it. You can look at the thing split screen, before and after. Then through here you can go to warm tones, which gives it a kind of an antique-y look, which is nice. You can go to an overexposed look. You can, there's a bunch of these things you can go through. Then you can go to the tone collection, which gets into antique dye is a choice, for instance. Antique sepia. These are reminiscent of like Carter's photos. of the Indians and whatnot. You can get into reds, selenium tones, sepia and gold, sepia and like selenium, where it's like a duotone basically. The highlights are warm, the shadows are in this blue. It's kind of a nice look. Just plain old sepia, I think, is very pretty on this shot because it looks like an old-fashioned photo. It's really pretty. And then you can go in here and you can go through basic exposure. You can change contrast, brightness. You can boost the blacks, boost the whites. You can go into adaptive exposure, which gets into the same kind of algorithms that were in Topaz Adjust, that do an overall change for like detail. And then you can go in and you can make the regions finer or else coarser. So if you go here, it's beginning to look really nicely detailed. And if you boost the blacks a little bit, it's making for a pretty interesting photo, just with a few little sliders. And then you can change the color sensitivity, where this looks back at the original color photo, so it allows you to change what's just red. What's yellow. It's not affecting it a lot, but it's changing little things. Mainly because this is a photo that's pretty much one color, blues. And then this is your normal color filtration, so you can change the hues overall.
When you get the image that you really want,
Yeah.
and you save that,
Yes.
does it save all that informational detail with it?
Yes. So you go up here to where it says presets, save preset, and you can name it and you can tell it where to save it. In this case, it's save in my collection, but you could put it elsewhere too.
So you could put a whole bunch of these images into a folder, and you can go back and look at them.
Yes.
An mental evaluation of what features really help.
Yeah.
If they desire them.
Yeah, and if you give it a name that's meaningful, that you say dark warm plus or something that means something to you, then you can go back to that all the time and use it as a starting point.
You can't go back. I mean, once you save that and send it back to Photoshop, you can't then open that image back and see what the setting was, right?
If you save the settings.
No, I know, but the image gets essentially flat.
Oh yes,
The
yes,
settings get flat.
yes.
They don't come up.
Well, but that's why here. Let me cancel out of this. That's why I made another layer.
Right.
So.
It's like in Lightroom, if you work or
right.
You save it as a PSD and you open that up, all your settings are all there.
Yeah.
Right. That's not the case here. No.
But which is the reason that they made it so you can save your settings, and it's really a pretty good way to do it. And if it's one click, you just have to make a note. You can make a note on your layer in Photoshop that whatever the name of that actual preset was, and it'll take you right back to it. But it won't take you back to your own personal adjustments to it unless you save it as such. So that's a peek at the black and white. Next. Here's another Dream Cruise photo that, this wasn't bad, but it wasn't what I saw when I took the picture. This is a little bit overcooked, but it's more like the kind of harsh light that I saw when I was taking the picture. This is probably a little bit truer to it. And then this one is just another, you know, pleasing look at the car without, looks more like a normal photo. And those are all just simple one-click things just by experimenting in the Topaz Adjust thing. So it's not a bad photo to start with, but you got 3 other looks at it really quickly. And then here's a part of that same abandoned factory complex that I forget, it's downriver. So that's just clicking on the Spicify filter. And then here's one where it's much more muted, setting sun kind of look. This one, if this looks like too much, you know, you can go up to opacity and just go through the range of all of that, or start backing it off like 50% and all the way back to 0. And then the same with this one. You can leave this on top of the second one. And again, just...
If I saw that picture, looking at the sky, I would say that looks like an altered picture. I had no other point of view.
That it what does or doesn't?
It would look to me like this looks like an altered picture.
Yeah. That's okay. So I don't think there's anything wrong with altering it.
As long as you don't pass yourself off as a historian.
Here's a portrait of another advertising exec. What came out of the camera, just one click crisps it up a little bit. And that the actual preset is called crisp. The next one is called you know, dramatic. And it's basically a little bit less detail but more color. And then this one is called portrait drama. And it's a little bit of both of those things, which is a really nice picture. You see how you get more detail in his jacket and things as you do that. And in the face as well. Let's just, from that. This looks pretty much like a normal, well-saturated photo, you know. So we'll go next. We're almost done here. Detroit skyline. from Belle Isle. That's what the camera saw. That's one click. And this is a different look that's done. This was done in the restyle one. This one was done in adjust. So it's two different ways to approach the same photo. But again, you can take this and you can use a blending mode and make kind of a composite of those two things. That's the underlying layer before and after. And that's kind of nice. And if you really want to bring more color into it, you just duplicate the top layer at 100%, and you get this beautiful warm sky with detail in it. So there's lots of things you can do with a simple couple of clicks. And knowing a little bit in Photoshop, you can do even more with it. Oh, sorry. I on this, I used. Let me see here. I used soft light. Overlay is a little bit too much, maybe. Hard light is kind of the same as overlay. Vivid drives you crazy. You could use multiply to make a more thing, but as you go into the opacity and you drag that down to about 50, it starts looking pretty interesting with just multiply. So there's, you know, for people that want to be creative, that want to look at things in a different way, just experiment. I mean, that's the whole thing about all this, whether it's using the Topaz presets or using Photoshop. The more you play with it, the better you get at it. And you can start out with like an idea in your head of how you want to make it look, or you can let your experiments take you in a direction you hadn't even thought of. But I think the key to having fun with photography is to just turn yourself loose. You know, experiment, have fun, and like here's a bridge downriver, not far from Zug Island, and with one click, pretty neat. You get more detail in the building. You get these fabulous clouds, this like sunsetty cloud thing going on with one click, and that's in the Topaz Adjust. So here's a nice picture of the trees and snow. Nothing wrong with it, but with one click you can do that. Or that, you know. So, and if this looks too blue to you, you go to opacity in Photoshop and just walk it back. Almost everything I do when I'm working on my own pieces, I'll kind of overcook what I'm doing on a separate layer, and then I'll back it off a little bit. It gives me that flexibility to because as you're working, you get all excited about, oh, look at the color and the detail and stuff, and then you look at it the next day and realize that's a bit much, you know.
You typically shoot with a high-level DS.
I shoot with everything. The best camera is the one you have with you. So I shoot with my iPhone. I'm now shooting Nikon. My main Nikon camera is just mid-range, D7000. But I have good glass. The lenses are top quality lenses. But I find I don't need I don't need to carry around the big camera all the time. It's just too much, sometimes. So, but I think, the camera you have with you is the best camera going. So, just, if you want to be creative, if you want to get better, shoot a lot. I'll take 30, 50 photos a day of just things that like catch my eye with my iPhone. It might be a neat pattern. It might be the way the light looks on someone. I was walking down the street one day and I saw this woman reading a book, and the light was bouncing off the book onto her face. It was beautiful. So I stopped and asked if I could take a picture, and she went back to reading, and I took a picture. Often you don't even have to ask if your body language is right and you make eye contact and you hold up your camera and nod, they'll nod back that you can take your picture. But it's go out and shoot, and then come back and experiment with this kind of stuff. That's the joy in photography, and there's no wrong way to do it. If you like it, it's the right way for you. Well, that's it for my presentation. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can come up afterwards. And, thank you.